Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Creating the Ultimate B2B Experience in the Manufacturing Sector. I'm your moderator, Zoe Fernandez from Merkle's marketing team. Before I introduce our speakers and we get to the webinar content, I'd like to share some key housekeeping items for you to keep in mind throughout today's presentation. The webinar console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows you have open. Please ask questions throughout the webinar as we'd love to hear from you. To ask a question, please submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon on your screen, entering your question, and hitting send. If we don't get your question today, we will follow up with you in a couple of days with a response. And if you'd like to revisit today's webinar, a recorded version will be emailed to you in the coming days. And lastly, resources related to this webinar can be found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a look to learn more. Today, we are joined by two industry experts, Matthew Powell, Managing Director at B2B International in the UK, and Jill Dodonis, Strategy Director at Gyro. And now I'm going to hand over to Matt to get us started.
Thanks very much, Zoe, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We've got what we think is a really interesting presentation to share with you, some insights from a pretty big piece of research that we've recently conducted, and also some interesting case studies as well that Jill's going to be talking us through. Just to give a bit of an overview of how we're going to structure the session, we'll first talk about why now. Why are we talking about this architecting the ultimate B2B customer experience now? We'll then look at the nuts and bolts of the research that this session is based on. Then we'll take a look at the current experience in the manufacturing sector. Then we're going to look at some sub-vertical differences, and there's some really interesting differences that we've pulled out from this piece of research. And then, because this is a robust piece of research across a range of different sectors, not just manufacturing, we'll also look at what works well in other sectors and some potential opportunities for disruption. So first things first, why now? Well, I work for B2B International. We're a B2B insight agency, and we've been focusing on B2B research for the past 22 years. So B2B's always been in our blood. But as with Gyro, last year we joined together with 5 other agencies to launch Merkle B2B, and our goal is around architecting the ultimate B2B customer experience. So what we're talking you through here is a piece of research that stands on the shoulders of a few other pieces of research that we've done over the years, but this time focusing on what are the key ingredients that help B2B companies architect the ultimate B2B customer experience. So just to give a bit more in terms of scene setting and in terms of why now, one thing that we all know, it's been a challenging 12 months for everybody, for all businesses. I think even before that, there was lots of disruption going on in the B2B space anyway. These 3 points in particular around expectations, one thing that I'm sure all of us know is that digital experiences that we come across in our B2C lives quite often filter through into our expectations in our B2B lives. So expectations are increasing in terms of what B2B companies should be delivering. There's increased complexity, whether it's supply chains, decision-making units, having to pivot a business or a business unit. And then, of course, there's tackling things with limited resources as well. And there's no silver bullets to fix any of these things. We have to be realists about this. But one thing we should bear in mind with this piece of research in mind is that every B2B brand is built up of a collection of moments in time, of different touch points. Essentially, every interaction that somebody has with a B2B organization crystallizes their perception of that B2B brand. And that could be anything from downloading a thought leadership white paper. It could be speaking to someone in the sales team. It could be a digital experience they have with that brand. It could be speaking to someone in customer services. All of these interactions build up and crystallize that B2B brand in the eyes of the market over time. And B2B brands either deliver in those moments or they fall by the wayside. So this piece of research is trying to identify all those different ingredients that build up the customer experience and ultimately to help B2B companies know where and when they can excel. So what are the key ingredients in creating the ultimate B2B customer experience? As I say, this is a piece of research that's built upon a few years of research that we've done, but this time looking at a number of different ingredients that build up the customer experience, and it's based upon some pretty comprehensive research. So what does that research look like? Well, this was based on over 3,000 interviews globally. It's a piece of research that's been over a year in the making in terms of the design, and then there was a concerted fieldwork period and then the analysis that we've gone through. And as part of this piece of research, we had these B2B decision makers rate 5,000 different B2B brand experiences. And these brand experiences across 4 different industries. So we've got financial services, we've got manufacturing, which we're here to talk about today. We've got professional services, and we've got technology. And as I say, this is 3,000 interviews, so a very, very robust piece of research. It's global in scope, and it's people from a range of different sectors and a range of different buying decisions that they went through. So it allows us to cut the data in a number of different ways and really build up what that B2B customer experience looks like. So just to give us all a sense of what the survey looked like, we got people to go through essentially the buying journey for a number of different products or services. And this could be anything from not using a particular brand right through to choosing an organisation, through to actually using this organisation and upselling that particular product or service. So these are the different stages. If we look here, we've got a brand being not considered. Then we move on to potential clients doing some research to see who might be worth contacting. Quite often, a lot of B2B brands actually fall out of the process at this stage. Then there's, once contacted, they'll look at, in more detail, a handful of different providers to look for a quote or a proposal. Then a winner emerges and is chosen. And then there's new brands that are working out, that they're reaffirmed as established partners, and then it moves on to a successful partnership that can lead to repurchase and upselling. And what our research did is we got people to rate different brands as they moved through this purchase process, and we got them to rate them on a number of different factors. And those factors were determined based upon a piece of research that we did, basically synthesizing a lot of information from literature reviews, from pieces of research that we've done in the past, to 30 different attributes, 30 different ingredients that feed into the customer experience. And the research allowed us to see which of these ingredients, these attributes, companies had to be doing particularly well on to move from each of these stages. So from being considered to actually moving to being a winner, through to being a successful customer and an ongoing customer where there's opportunity for upsell. It also allowed us to see if somebody was getting any of these attributes wrong, what are the things that would make a company drop out of this particular process. So the research has enabled us to build up a really clear picture of what are the superpowers that companies have to get right to move people through the buying process and also to become successful customers. So let's take a look at what this means in the manufacturing space. Now then, we're going to talk through four particular superpowers. Now, there's 2 main customer-centric needs. First of all, what we look at is at the company level. So these are the superpowers that relate to the organisation that's part of this decision. So the first one is reliability. This is the first of the 4 superpowers. And the broad needs and wants here are that this is a brand that we can trust to deliver. So essentially the hygiene factors. It needs to fulfil basic requirements, so your customers view your brand as trustworthy and reliable. The second one is understanding. So the broad need and wants here is they get my company's needs. They provide tailored and adaptable service approaches that make it clear that you're aligned with your customer's company. And one thing that we've seen from our previous research is actually this is an opportunity to build an emotional connection with B2B companies at this particular phase, if you can show that you really understand that organisation. And then finally, we've got the buyer level. So this is, the third one is enrichment, and this makes my work life better. And this directly benefits the individual decision maker by providing a connection that helps them improve professionally and personally. And then we've got preeminence. And this is a brand that people are proud to work with. So you position your brand as sophisticated, modern, and a leader within your field so that buyers are proud to work with you. So the thought leadership plays into this. So we've got these 4 overarching brand superpowers: reliability and understanding, which are company level needs. Then we've got enrichment and preeminence, which are to do with the person. And quite often we think about these company level needs when we're thinking about how we sell to other businesses. But this research shows that the buyer level attributes can be just as important and sometimes can be the things that can clinch a deal. So we're going to have a look at these in a bit more detail. Now, what we've got, as I say, this is 30 different attributes or ingredients that sit under these 4 superpowers. And what you can see on the screen here are the 6 ingredients that impact every single stage of the buyer journey. So you'll see we've got the different stages across the top, and then we've got a white dot for where each of these different ingredients plays a key role. Now, we're going to look at the ones that play a deciding role at the different stages in a moment, but these 6 that are on screen that you can see here, they play a distinct role at each stage of the buyer journey. And you can see 4 of these here are to do with reliability, so meeting my company's minimum quality or functional needs, being competitively priced, complying with regulations, law, industry standards, and ethical practices, and then taking steps to mitigate risks. These are under the reliability superpower. And these are things that companies have to get right at each stage to move through that buyer journey and onto the customer experience side of things as well. Then we've got preeminence. So we've got active thought leaders in their category and sector, and then having a clear vision of and actively working towards fulfilling their obligations to society. Again, 2 key things that play a key role at each stage of the buyer journey. So we know that these are important. How do companies do? Well, when we look at these, you can see that those ones that we might see more as hygiene factors that sit under reliability, on the whole, B2B companies do particularly well at these. So you see most of these dots are coloured green, and you'll see there's a key at the bottom. So where it's green, this is where most B2B companies are doing particularly well at this attribute. Where we've got yellow, this is an average performance, which means that performance is middling, a bit of inconsistency. Some may do this well, others may do this poorly, but could be an area for companies to steal a march on the pack. And then we've got red, poor performance. So competitive pricing is an area that all B2B companies seem to fall down on in the manufacturing sector. So as I say, we can see these hygiene factors, good performance scores. The preeminence attributes is average performance. So active thought leaders in their category and sector, and then having this clear vision and actively working towards fulfilling their obligations to society are important things at every step of the buyer journey and then the customer life cycle. But at the moment, not all companies are doing well there. So this could be an area where companies could differentiate against their competition. So those are the 6 things that play a key role at every single stage. What we're going to look at now are 8 other ingredients that are specific to the manufacturing sector at different points. And you can see these spread across the 4 superpowers. So if we go through the journey, we can see moving from not considered to researched, we've got products and services not prone to fail, and we've got offering enough variety and choice. These are 2 things that will move a company from not being considered to being researched, where somebody is going to go and explore more information about that organisation. Then once they've done their research and they're moving on to shortlisting, there's 3 other things: consistently delivering as promised, supporting us with expertise, and offering enough variety and choice, again, still being a key role there. Moving from shortlisted and contacted to quote and proposal, we've got I feel safe signing a contract with them. So how can B2B companies demonstrate that at this particular stage? That then still plays a point when it gets from quote and proposal to choosing, but also making it easy to sell them internally is key there. So what are companies doing to enable the people that they're speaking to then go on and sell their organization to their different stakeholders? So you may have varying different needs, be it from the financial decision maker to the C-suite, etc. And then from chosen to repurchase and upsell, we've got a smoothly integrated offering and a source of inspiration in the wider business world. These are the kind of things, these 2 things here that make a real difference in the manufacturing sector as to when somebody's a customer, it's the kind of thing that's going to retain them and hopefully upsell them as well as a customer. So that's the measures of importance. And this is what it looks like in terms of performance. So we've got products and services not prone to fail. That's a green, so companies are doing well there. Interestingly, offering enough variety and choice. This is something where there's inconsistencies, so room for improvement, and again, room for differentiation for some manufacturing companies that can get this right. Also, consistently delivering as promised is something that people see inconsistencies with. When we look at feeling safe signing a contract with them and making it easy to sell internally, these are areas of strong performance. And then here, in terms of when somebody's a customer, retaining them as a customer and potentially upselling them, these two attributes of a smoothly integrated offering and a source of inspiration in the wider business world are, again, areas where there's middling performance. So the companies that can get this right have a higher chance of retaining customers and potentially upselling them, increasing that share of wallet. So we've looked at some of these key differences here that have come out of the research. I'm now going to hand over to Jill, who's going to talk us through some interesting case studies that are relevant to this.
Thanks, Matthew. I'd like to start by discussing some of the inferred reasoning behind what we're looking at on this screen. 1 second, let me go back. Great. I'm Matthew or Zoe, if you can move back to the previous slide. Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the inferred reasoning behind some of the findings here. Is Matthew went through all of them and which ones are not performing well within manufacturing companies. I'd like to start off by discussing the consistency of delivery. And while that might not be something that we might want to talk about or focus in terms of relating to customer experience, it's a big one. And one of the reasons why that companies might not be performing so well right now could be due to COVID-19. In the manufacturing industry alone, employees working remotely increased by 59% than the norm. This is just an industry that is very accustomed to having its employees on site, and frankly weren't really prepared to support them remotely. And that when that might be what that might suggest in terms of why weren't they prepared, it could be that they didn't have a strong tech core to be able to support their workers, and perhaps manufacturers on average are pretty digitally immature. And in fact, they are. So let's talk a little bit about digital transformation for a minute. Most manufacturing companies are at a lower range maturity of digital transformation. On a scale of 1 to 4, manufacturers on the whole are at about 2.3, with petrochemicals at 3, the highest, and mining extraction at about 1.7. So what does that have to do with customer experience and what we're talking about today? A lot. So let's talk about understanding and take that for an example. Primary tenet of digital transformation isn't just, putting tech at the core of the business and making sure that you have all the right things tethered together and running smoothly, but it's also about putting customer at the center of the business. A lot of companies say they do that, but a truly customer-centric approach is one that also considers the product relationship with the client and customer and that holistic customer experience. And that means designing products with customers' ever-heightening needs in mind. And a small, not small, but a global survey that we sent out recently came back with some really interesting findings in terms of, how to build those products. And believe it or not, but a lot of B2B buyers are asking companies to, hey, include me in your design process for those products. They want to make sure that you're designing to their needs, and designing to everything they need, nothing they don't, and that seamless integration that we see isn't really performing so well here. And for those of you on the call, who've been involved in product development or any kind of customer insight, if you think back to any voice of the customer intel that you've read, you may have seen a lot of customers retrofitting products. It's a big tell is that their B2B manufacturers aren't really delivering to their needs. So they're not delivering to their needs. It really hurts the customer experience. So not only is product development critical, but equally so is helping audiences understand your very complex and often crucially important product to their business. And that starts to border on those lines of understanding, which is that other critical customer experience superpower that we're talking about. I want to show you an example of what GE is doing with its energy management equipment, so you can see what that looks like. Here we have GE, and GE, as you know, has invested pretty heavily in digital transformation many years ago. I think it was 8 years ago they started. They didn't do everything right. McKinsey really railed on them in terms of what their initial phase in digital transformation looked like, which was just a monolithic approach with more than a $2 billion investment of trying to do everything at the same time. It didn't work. But eventually what they did was they iterated, and they succeeded at putting customer at the core of their brand experience and digital transformation. Here we see energy management equipment on this slide, a small sliver of what they do. It's not easy to purchase or understand. And one of the other complexities is that we know that B2B buyers aren't a single person. They're a group of people. They're a group of people who make decisions together and have varying levels of technical knowledge. So GE created a create your own journey of understanding what product and service that you need. It's a highly complex one. It's not just 4 or 5 different areas that you can click on to choose what your certain or unique situation is, but there are nearly hundreds of different scenarios that can be calculated. And that's just for energy management equipment offering alone. There's also a selector guide, a diagnostic tool that leads you to an interactive product page. And once you get to that interactive product page, which is in the upper left-hand corner there, it's a 3D model that rotates, and you're able to click on nearly every component within that in that module to be able to understand what every part of that product does or is. It reduces complexity. It helps build consensus among decision makers because people are able to understand what it is that they're buying or what they need. And it inspires a lot of confidence in GE to meet not just functional needs, but also that emotional need. They're making their job easier. So this is a true example of the B2B customer experience superpower of understanding. You know, you get who I am and you're giving me what I need. And enrichment, you make it easy to trust you and work with you. And let's not forget, sell into our other stakeholders easily. And I'm going to pass it back to Matthew for the next section.
Thanks a lot, Jill. I love that example. Really, really interesting. So we've looked at manufacturing at an overall level so far. What we're going to do next is look at some differences by sub-verticals. There's some really interesting differences that have come out of this piece of research. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is given the size of the research sample that we've got, we're able to deeper dive into some splits in the sample and get some really interesting insights from it. So what you'll be able to see on the screen right now is some splits by 3 particular subsectors. So we've got commodity products, so things like chemicals, adhesives, materials. We've got high-tech and specialized components. And then we've got machinery, so things like industrial construction machinery and powered tools. And what we've done is we've looked for the flavors, the ingredients in the superpowers research where there's the biggest difference by these different subsectors. And we've got this line here, which is the manufacturing average performance across all of the different attributes. So what we can see, all 3 of these subsectors do particularly well on the ingredient which is supporting us with expertise. So you can see machinery across all of these. Actually, machinery is ahead of the pack. Then broadly, it's high-tech and specialized components follows, and then we've got commodity products, which on the whole is at the back of the pack. But all 3 doing particularly well there in terms of supporting us with expertise, which is good to see. When we look at understanding, we've got having a smoothly integrated offer, and this is something that the machinery companies do particularly well at. Commodity products and high tech are falling a bit behind. So again, anything that's behind this line, as with the yellows and the reds that we saw on the previous slides, these are opportunities where there could be an opportunity for differentiation. When we look at preeminence, we can see there's 3 attributes here. We've got active thought leaders in their category and sector. We've got source of inspiration in the wider world of business, and we've got actively working towards fulfilling obligations to society. And you can see machinery and high tech, they do particularly well in terms of being active thought leaders in their category and sector, whereas commodity products, there's room for improvement there. And again, opportunity for differentiation for those companies that can get that right. But interestingly, these other 2, in fact, these 3 things could be tackled in one go, essentially, one initiative. If we've got thought leadership where we can become a source of inspiration for the wider world of business, and we can also communicate around the work that we're doing, fulfilling our obligations to society, this could all be pushed up in one initiative. And actually, that might suggest these high-tech and specialised components companies, although they're doing particularly well in terms of their thought leadership, when we look at those other 2 dots beneath in terms of being a source of inspiration and the work towards fulfilling obligations, it could be that some of the messaging there is slightly missing the mark. So anyway, some really interesting differences by these 3 subsectors, and some really interesting clues as to where companies can start to make improvements to stand out from the pack from other manufacturing companies. And again, Jill, I know you've got a really interesting case study around this.
I do. I want to hang on this slide for a second and talk a little bit about commodity products and the friction that they face in appearing as thought leaders or a source of inspiration for the wider world business, and also being seen as being committed to societal good. We think about chemical companies, and pick your favorite one, and they're a big part of this category, but we don't often think of them or associate chemical companies as being champions of inspiration and action to achieve societal good. We just don't. One of the reasons why is oftentimes, or historically, they've been seen as almost at the opposite end of that. But believe it or not, the manufacturing category that they're in, 43% of manufacturing companies globally are committed to active purpose. One of the top 4 among other industries, with finance at the top, followed by healthcare, and then professional service. And so what do I mean by active purpose? I mean that it's a company that has designed into its business strategy and operating model a commitment to actions, not just mantras, not just, we have a brand purpose, we care about X, Y, and Z. No, it's actually woven into the fabric of their business strategy. While that sounds nice, and a lot of people like to roll their eyes when they hear the word purpose, there's a business case for it. And 71% of B2B buyers are more likely to purchase when they see that there's a personal value being reflected, and 78% become brand ambassadors who tell their colleagues to purchase from you. And in fact, increasingly, B2B buyers are required to work with B2B vendors who exemplify active purpose, especially as it relates to sustainability. So to increase your superpowers of enrichment and preeminence, I'm suggesting that you do what Olam did, and we're going to show you what that case study looks like. Great. So Olam is an ingredient manufacturer and processor. They're sourced from a network of about 5 million farmers globally, with more than 25,000 B2B customers worldwide. What they did was they created a tool that allowed their customers to see their environmental footprint by displaying over 80 product sourcing related KPIs in a visually engaging and very intuitive way. So this is an example of purpose in action, and it's giving customers control and an X-ray transparency into their buying decisions. There's front-end functionality, included some custom charting components that you can see here, and interactive maps with product journey animations, which really is about maximizing that interconnectivity potential for site content, but also really strengthening that customer experience as it relates to an experience of enrichment and preeminence in which buyers can realize, the positive impact of the decisions that they're making on the greater world. So we think this is a great example of it, something to aspire to, and the transparency in it is just really, really inspiring. I'm going to hand it back over to Matthew to take us through the next section.
Thanks very much, Jill. Again, another great case study. Now, what we're going to look at in this final section is around opportunities for disruption. So what we've seen so far are some insights across the manufacturing sector. We've then looked at those subsectors to see where there are differences. Now we're going to look outside the sector. So we're going to look at all the other different sectors that we covered as part of this research to see what are the things that are making a difference in those sectors, because there could be some clues here that we might want to pinch from those sectors to make our customer experience even better than anything that exists. So again, we're going to look at these superpower ingredients and what's important. And as I say, these are the individual components that have an impact across all the different sectors at these different stages. So first of all, in terms of moving to being researched, reducing our costs is something. So companies that can evidence that they might be able to reduce the cost of a particular provider, that's something that can help move companies along into being researched. Then moving from researched into shortlisted and contacted, we've got a few different things here. So we've got providing support, info and expertise that we need. Working with them keeps me up to date and more employable, so a real personal add for the buyer. And then that they're a leader in innovative products and services, and they have a progressive approach to all stakeholders. So three of the things here at this particular stage being the personal ad rather than the company ad attributes. Then moving from shortlisted to quote and proposal, we've got improving our productivity and saving us time and resources. We've got providing the support, info and expertise that we need again. We've got approachable and transparent when dealing with us. Keeping us up to date and more employable, and again, being a leader in innovative products and services. So three of these things here, being a leader in innovation, keeping us up to date and more employable, and providing support, info and expertise that we need, helping companies bridge that gap from research right through to quote and proposal. Being approachable and transparent, again, is something that's important when moving to being chosen, but having a smoothly integrated offer is something that's really important. And then making my workday a little more fun and entertaining, something that's across all B2B sectors is something that really helps those companies move from quote and proposal to being chosen. Perhaps something that, if you were to ask us top of our mind what would be important, this perhaps wouldn't be one of the first things that spring out. But actually, from this robust piece of work, we know it's something that's really important. And then finally, moving from chosen to repurchase and upsell is having a progressive approach to all stakeholders. So as with the previous slides that we've seen, and the reason for showing this is because it can give us some clues of some of the things that really matter to B2B decision makers and some of the things that are happening in other sectors. And it may be that some of these things sit particularly well with the direction that your organisation is going in, or something that that is achievable, something that could give the organisation an edge over the rest of the pack. So again, as with the previous slides, I know Jill has got a really good case study to talk about in relation to this.
Sorry, it was on mute. Thank you. So we have an example here of PayPal and taking a progressive approach to all of its stakeholders. In partnership, PayPal Empowerment Grants for Black Business Program, which awarded up to $10,000 to more than 1,000 Black-owned businesses that have been impacted by civil unrest. There's a huge amount of work going into supporting these nonprofits as a platform. They decided a lot of their business to making it easy for charities to accept donations. There's a huge support for women in financial services in a tech world, and luminaries would each receive a one-time scholarship to offset an academic year of tuition fees. Sample projects, efforts, and events within this program included participating in events for women to access industry knowledge and insight on technical trends, providing opportunities for building critical skills and leadership presence, facilitating strong mentoring relationships and personal development, and supporting the next generation of women in STEM while providing engaging volunteer opportunities. It really created opportunities overall for women to build technical acumen and share their passion through knowledge sharing, meetups, and hackathons. So a really great example of what a preeminent experience with a brand inspiring its community looks like in action. Matthew? Great.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jill. Well, I guess our final slide really is about bringing this back to what does this research mean for organisations, and I guess there's 5 key things that we wanted to get across really in summary. First of all, we provide actionable intelligence and insight about what makes a meaningful difference to a B2B buyer's experience, and we've been able to look at that by different cuts of the data as well across different segments. We can identify the specific elements that make a significant difference on a B2B buyer's journey to purchase, provide an understanding of how B2B customer experiences currently work in the manufacturing sector, and identify how your brand performs against category benchmarks and against each other. And then focus your resources on how to optimize against the category, or as we've just seen in the last couple of slides in the example that Jill spoke about, is a complete step change. So looking to other sectors for inspiration and thinking about what could we be doing differently to stand out from the crowd when it comes to our customer experience. So that was our last slide. Thank you very much for joining and listening. Hopefully that's provided some useful inspiration and some really good insights. I think, Zoe, we've got time for questions and answers now.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you, Jill, as well, for sharing today's content. It does look like we've had a few questions come in. If you have questions, you can still submit them. We have a little bit of time left. So I'm going to jump straight in to the questions. So Matt, I'm going to send this first one over to you. Do you feel the pandemic has been the main cause of any shift in consumer behavior in the manufacturing industry, or do you think these changes in buyer expectations were always going to be seen?
Yeah, well, I guess I think buyer expectations are always changing. I mean, that context slide that we had at the beginning, we spoke around the impact of experiences that we see in the consumer world and how those filter through to our B2B lives. So I think expectations are always going to be evolving, but undoubtedly the pandemic has impacted experiences, and I know we've seen with companies that we've worked with in the manufacturing sector, quite a few of them actually, of one of the questions that they're dealing with is obviously whereas there may have been face-to-face serving of certain elements of their customer experience, whether it's technical visits on site or the sales team, some of those have shifted to virtual experiences, and companies are racking their brains thinking how much of this is going to stick. Is this something that we can continue to do, or are those experiences going to revert back to how they were once things start opening up again? And one thing that's crucial there is of course understanding your customers' needs. That's one thing that we know is really important. Speaking to customers, finding out what is acceptable to them, how those needs might have evolved. Some might actually prefer the nimbleness of being served via video rather than face-to-face. Or it could be that some companies think, well, there's an opportunity here to provide the face-to-face service as a premium or something to our key accounts. Yeah, undoubtedly it's changed the experience, it's changed expectations, and I think the thing that's going to be key for companies is speaking to customers, learning about what your customers' expectations are and what's going to delight them in the future.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Matt. Jill, I'm going to send this next question over to you. The questions come in says it seems very interesting that there's a lot of information to digest. Is this something that can be simplified and applied to my own brand?
Sure. Yes, there's a lot of information to digest here, but I, suggest an iterative approach to really anything that you're going to do to adjust your customer experience. And the first thing that you can think about is first, form a hypothesis about it. Brainstorm internally to figure out how your brand is really performing against some of the brand superpowers that we talked about today. Once you form that hypothesis, maybe put together a methodology for testing it. Conduct surveys, conduct some voice of the customer interviews, perhaps go outside of your customer base and interview prospects and find out why they're not buying from you or working with you. And then what you want to do is really find out what the gap is between what your hypothesis is and what you found. And that's when you can start to optimize and make small steps to get closer to delivering a customer experience that really resonates with your audiences and elevates their experience.
Great, thank you so much, Jill. This next question I'll throw over to you, Matt. Are there any other buyer differences to consider as part of this framework?
Yeah, good question. Well, one thing that we've also looked into is we've looked into various different splits of this data, whether it's sector, company size, etc. One thing that's really interesting is when we look at the differences across generations, and actually we do see some really interesting and clear differences when we do that. So millennials, for example, there's certain elements of these superpowers that really resonate with them at certain stages. And likewise with Gen X and then baby boomers. One that's really interesting when we look at the personal ad. There's some really stark differences there. So millennials, one thing that really sticks out to them is that attribute that was around enjoyment, and working with this company is going to give me enjoyment. Then when we looked at Gen X, that was slightly different. It wasn't enjoyment they were focusing on. It was around learning and developing them. So working with this company is going to help me grow as an individual through learning and education and so on. And then when we looked at the baby boomers, again, those two things didn't play a part. But the thing that was important to them was that working with this company is going to grow my personal network. So three very, very different differences, and those kind of things differed throughout the buyer journey. So yeah, there's certainly different lenses that we can use to look at to see where the buyer journeys differ.
Well, that's great. Thank you for the insights there, Matt. I think we've got time for one other question. Are you able to share any other client examples?
Yeah, well, actually, I suppose tie back to that first point that I made. Really, I think that's perhaps the biggest thing that we've seen is companies trying to adapt to what the new normal is in terms of how they serve customers. Which part of the customer experience can be digitally transformed, and which part of the customer base are happy to be served digitally, whether they will tolerate a shift from face-to-face service, or actually whether it's something that will differentiate more often than not, this digital serving. I think that's the thing that we've seen from companies that are trying to navigate this is understanding that balance of the human experience versus digital, and how quickly they can shift to a digital experience. And as I say, I think the key thing there, because it's going to be slightly different for each organisation, and we've already seen those subsector differences in manufacturing a few slides ago. Then one thing that's going to be really important is understanding your customer needs and the needs of the marketplace, and how that feeds into what that experience should look like.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Matt. So that's all the time we have for questions today. If your question wasn't answered, we will follow up with you in the coming days. We do have one final session as part of our Industry Deep Dive series, which is taking place tomorrow at 11 o'clock Eastern. So if you're interested in learning more about the financial services industry, a link to register will pop up on your screen in a few seconds. And as a reminder, you'll receive an email from us with a link to the on-demand version of this webinar in the next couple of days. I would like to thank Matt and Jill again for sharing today's content with us, and for each of you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.